Thank you.
Well, let's then begin with a reminder of a place where the Thinnai is not going to disappear because it's described and written about in a book. Um, I'll start with a quote. I exited with my packet of cigarettes and sat on the little Thinnai, which now seemed minuscule to me. Despite the darkness, I began to observe its every nook and cranny without deigning to respond to three bald six faces who placed himself on his motorbike while pretending to drive off. In defiance of time, the Thinnai had managed to keep the mystery of temporality. Dusty memories trapped in the crevices of the wall of the old Thinnai escaped like sylphs relieved of a long dreamed of freedom.
Je sortis mon paquet de cigarettes et m'assis sur le petit Thinnai qui maintenant me paraissait minuscule. En dépit de la pénombre, je me mis à observer ses moindres recoins sans daigner répondre à trois bourses, six visages, qui s'étaient installés sur la moto et faisaient semblant de la conduire. Au mépris du temps, le Thinnai avait réussi à garder le mystère de la temporalité. Des souvenirs poussiéreux, emprisonnés dans les crevasses du mur du vieux Thinnai, s'échappèrent comme des sylphes soulagés d'une liberté longtemps rêvée. So tell me, Ananya, you were in Pondicherry last year and you took this book with you and you were just roaming around the streets of Pondicherry. Were you looking for Thinnais or what were you looking for?
Show us your book, Ari. Mine is in my study, so I would have to go up there. Do you have it with you? Do you have your book? Yeah, just so that people can have a look. It's got a Thinnai on the cover, and it's called Le Thinnai. So obviously, I was very excited to receive your book on the eve, literally, of my departure for India. And the first thing I was going to do is I'm from Calcutta myself, and I also go to Delhi. But this time, we were flying into Chennai because the first stop on the agenda was Pondicherry. And that was a kind of a coincidence because in my work on what was beginning to look like a research project on Creole Indias, through 2018, so I gave, Kakuli very kindly mentioned my Infosys prize. As a part of that prize, I had to give some public lectures. So I gave a lecture in Calcutta at the Victoria Memorial that was in January 2018 on Creole Indias. And I used the example of the comptoirs and the enclaves of the Hooghly, which the INTAC, of course, has done a lot of work on. Chandanagar, Chinsura, Serampur, Bandel. So these comptoirs are very much like Pondicherry in a way in culture because they are the impress of an older European presence in India, which continued even when the British consolidated their empire. So I revisited those comptoirs. I made myself understand again what I wanted to do about with this heritage of India. And that's what I presented at the talk in Victoria Memorial. And from that time onwards, I realized there was a project and I wanted to go to other places in India, which I sensed were similar. So I had already worked a lot in Goa, as you know, and I was deriving some paradigms about Creole India actually from the way the Portuguese had left their presence in Goa, and was very curious to see what I would see in Pondicherry. Like as a parallel. Was there a parallel with French India that I knew happened with Goa, or with this kind of very multi-European presence in evident in the Hooghly? What would I find there? Well, in the meanwhile, between 2018 and 2019 December, which is when I went to Pondicherry, I met you. So, and I realized that you had written a book called The Thinnai, and you sent it to me, and thankfully it really arrived on the eve of my departure, because I think the story would have been very different if I didn't have your book with me when I went to Pondicherry, you see. So already when I went to Pondicherry and I stayed in the wonderful Palais de Mahe hotel, because I'm very interested when we are talking about heritage and how we keep heritage living in a city like Pondicherry. I'm really interested in the role of hospitality. And so I made sure that I was looking for a so-called heritage place. And I chose this, and I was very interested because I'd been to Cochin earlier, a few months, maybe earlier in that year, or was it the previous year? Anyway, already in Kochi, I had seen the same people, the Good Earth, they were doing the same. So I recognized the signature of how they're restoring heritage homes, and I saw the parallels between the architecture of Fort Kochi and Pondicherry as a result. So those are the things I was looking out for. But of course, as we know, I understood, not least from simultaneously reading a book, that what we see as the French, typical, the old white town, which is restored and very beautifully restored by Intac. As I walked on the streets of that space of the 4 boulevards, I could see the intact plaques. I could see the French intervention. So I saw there's a lot of heritage and conservation work going on, which is certainly keeping this place from looking decrepit and uncared for, and it's very good for drawing all kinds of tourists and for having this economic kind of engine, which then makes also the people of Pondicherry feel that they have something of value, in their town. But what was actually more interesting for me was when I left that and I started walking towards Meso Perumal, and I started crossing Ishwaran Kovil Street. Am I right? Is that the street? I said it right. Yeah. And that's when I started seeing buildings that looked like the buildings that you were talking about in your book. And that's when because of my way of understanding Creole architecture in India, that really fell, because as even in your book, you talk about the oak Creole and the bark Creole. There's a certain kind of Creole, which is really the descendants of the French rulers and the people who want to affiliate strongly with them. And the architecture is also a kind of high Creole architecture associated with them. But then there are other groups in Pondicherry, which are kind of in between. And this street and the houses with the amazing Thinnais, which seemed like this mixture of Tamil and some French, because I saw things, Creole touches like the lambrequin fringes, but there's also the columns in front of the house, So everything really made me feel that this is what I've been reading about in Ari's book. These are the Thinnais he's talking about, probably. So for me, I would say that I didn't know what I was looking for in Pondicherry. I assumed there would be something visually in the architecture that would help me understand a bit more where is the Creole in Pondicherry. And I found a range of possibilities. And your book was helpful in a kind of it was like a guide, a literary guide to understanding that. Because also in your book, you have different kinds of Thinnais. But I think this is the question I want to ask you. You wrote a book in French about a Thinnai, about a Pondicherry Thinnai, which is a Thinnai like the Thinnais I saw, a kind of a Franco-Tamil kind of special Pondicherry Thinnai, like I saw on Ishwaran Kovil Street. So I'm curious to know from you, what's the lineage or what's the literary genealogy of Thinnais in the space of the Tamil world? It's the word is Tamil, Thinnai is Tamil. So clearly there have been Thinnais in Tamil literature, in the architecture of Tamil Nadu before the French arrived and before this composite culture was created. I mean, can you tell us?
Okay. No, it's very interesting, that your experience with Pondicherry and Thinnai and all the heritage. But as you rightly asked me, the Thinnai is being mentioned already in the 3rd century in the Tamil literature. So one of the first time where the Thinnai is mentioned, but it's not mentioned as a Thinnai, right? In Patinapalai, which is part of the Changam period, Pattupattu. So there is one small text, which I'm going to read in Tamil. So you can say it in English for our public.
Yeah, I have a.
You have the translation, right? So this is from the Patinapalai from the 3rd century. Pal Tadumbum in the Valamana Uril, Sunnambu Pusya Suvatrudan, Kanum Aragana Vidugari, நீண்ட இருக்கையில் பேசும் கிளிகள் கொஞ்சி குலாவுகின்றன. Can you say that in English?
Yeah, I think this is the one with the quote with the milk, right? Because I recognize the one word.
Yes.
Is it milk? Yeah. I recognize that. Okay.
Exactly.
So I'm reading out the right translation.
Yeah.
So this is about a city. So it's about a fertile city with an abundance of milk, which presents itself with beautiful houses. Their plastered walls built from high benches welcome talking parrot. So I think this is what you mean, that the word Thinnai isn't used, but
It's
these
not
high.
used. They use as Ninda Irukei. So it's like I bench. And the city they are talking, it's about Kaveri Pattinam, Kaveri Pumbat, right? So the second time where the Thinnai is described is from the Chivaga Sindhamani. That's again very old text. Madiya Unavai Arundiyadum Abtiman Pavalakallum Vile Madipatra Kallal Saida Irumbiya Medel Amarந்து தன் தட்டில் இருக்கும் நிரம்பிய தண்ணியை தரையில் விடாமல் பூஜை செய்தான். So this is from the Chivaga Sindhamani.
And again, I recognize my second word of Tamil here, the tanni, the water. Really, thanks to these liquid, I'm able to keep track of these quotes. Okay, so here we have, after finishing his midday meal, the holy man sat down on a raised platform. So again, we have this idea of a raised platform, right? Adorned with precious stones, and celebrated his usual ceremonial rites with water collected in a plate, so that precisely this water would be poured on the ground. And this is, as you said, from the Sivaga Chintamani, right?
Yeah, Sivaga Chintamani. So you can see that that time already it was not, the Thinnai is not mentioned as a Thinnai. So it has been given different names. And interestingly, I'll come a little more contemporary, R.K. Narayanan, who used to use a lot of vernacular words in his literary work, like a Jatka and different type of thing, never mentioned Thinnai.
Wow.
He called it Puyol.
What did he call it?
Puyol.
Puyol.
Puyol, for me, doesn't sound Indian at all. I think this must come from either Portuguese word or some other words, but not from Tamil. Puyol. It's P-Y-O-L. From
got to look that one up. We'll find out.
We'll find out a little later. So even R.K. Narayanan doesn't use the name Thinnai, even though in his time Thinnai was already established. So one has to understand that Thinnai, first of all, was not part of the Tamil traditional house. So firstly they build the house and they use the debris of the construction to put on the facade. So this is how the Thinnai started. So that's why there was no name in the beginning. So they call it like.
But there was a function. There was a social function.
Yeah, the social function come later, because you know how hierarchical caste system that Tamil Nadu used to live. So it was not like welcoming everybody to come and sit on the Thinnai. So during when the Vijayanagara Empire was established, so the urban culture started to flourish. So that's the one way that passerbys, wayfarers used to sit and take a rest. So, and then again, it depends what class you belong, which caste you belong. It's not welcome to everybody. So we need to also be very careful that the Thinnai, however we can romanticize it, we also need to reflect that it's not proper welcome space. So it's a transitional space between the inside and the outside. So this is what the history of Thinnai starts from.
Well, this is really important. I think, what you've done is really, actually really valuable, because as you say, it's quite easy, especially if we are just as a literary critic, I can just read your book and use it as a kind of exemplum of thinking about the way Thinnais exist in Pondicherry or in Tamil Nadu, and just as you say, have a very romantic view that it's fulfilling certain functions. Because in your book, the Thinnai is a place where different people arrive and take a certain kind of, refuge on, and then this, while they are sitting on the Thinnai, they start talking about where they've come from, what Pondicherry, and through this device, as an author, you make people narrate their lives, and Pondicherry becomes like this confluence of different stories, and the Thinnai becomes a place where those stories can come together and your story can come together through it. So it's a very interesting and useful literary device. But if we don't have any idea of the history of this architectural, kind of component to a home in Tamil Nadu, in Tamil-speaking space, then I think we won't understand all those other things we're talking about. That it almost emerged out of this, almost like a struggle, within society itself. Like, how do you balance the rigors of the caste system and all its separations, which of course also has a class-based dimension, and how do you separate that from the necessity of urban life and modernity, which has a certain leveling out and an anonymity in it, and therefore, if you want to have people doing their business on a busy road, it's great if there's a space, a neutral space where they can rest a bit, Yeah. So but that tension it's almost like, we need to know that there was a history of how this space emerged, and then the gradual conversion of its function in society, in keeping with a kind of changing, the evolution in society itself, because of these many different factors. For example, in the case of Pondicherry, I'm sure the way Pondicherry becomes a hub for the world, not just, for the region. And I think that this makes me wonder about some of the Thinnais you write about in your book. Because in your book, you have two Thinnais, right?
Basically there are several Thinnais.
In the book, there are several Thinnais?
No. In the book, there are two Thinnais. You're absolutely right. But in the Tamil architecture, in the Tamil traditional houses, there are several Thinnais. Mm-hmm. There is what they call the Puram Thinnai and Agam Thinnai, Puram Thinnai. And then there is Ul Thinnai. So there is also Thinnai inside the house. Like what we call the Nadai, in Tamil we call Nadai. It's this kulwar which going from the main door to the inside house. So in between, there's also a Thinnai, which is called Ul Thinnai.
So, but that's like an inside courtyard.
No, it's not a courtyard, it's a Thinnai.
But it's inside.
It's inside the house, between the main door and the second door, which normally, some traditional Tamil houses, there are two doors. You have the main door, where the two Thinnais on both sides. You enter a small corridor, we call it Nadai. So that's where you work. Walking, Tamil Nadai means walk, to walk.
I see, you walk through it.
Yeah, you go through it, and then you have a second door, which opens to the Mutram.
Yes, the Mutram.
So this is what to call Ul Nadai, right? So then again, you have Puram Thinnai in the backyard.
Yeah.
In the backyard, next to the kitchen, you bathroom and this and that. But one has to understand that.
Sorry, I just want to ask you. What I want to ask you is this: that all these various other Thinnais that you encounter when you enter a house, a traditional Tamil house, then these are not open to the outside world, right?
No. This inside Thinnai, Ul Thinnai, it's only for people who they can sit and relax, sleep, take a nap. I used to live in my first house in Vaishal Street. We had this Ul Thinnai. I remember how cool it was. You can park your cycle on the side, and then you can just sleep and aram se take a nice nap. So this was Ul Thinnai. And the Puram Thinnai was mostly for women, menstruating women.
Right.
So Puram Thinnai, we keep it for menstruating women, so they can sit like isolated. So and then we have male Thinnai, which is on the terrace.
Okay.
So there are different Thinnais. Yeah, there are different Thinnais.
This is very fascinating. Yeah, I just, why I think it's very fascinating is that, again, this is why we need to not just understand a novel like yours, but also the context from which it's coming. Because in the novel, we are not allowed to really enter the house. So if the house of the protagonist in the novel had all these different Thinnais inside it, may well be the case, but we as readers are not given that access, right? So you actually don't exploit, or you deliberately don't allow the attention of the reader to be drawn to the interior of the house, where all these other Thinnais and these are very private things, like menstruating women and men having a get together on the terrace. These are not things that the outside world can access, or it's a business of the household. So for me, this actually confirms something very interesting about your novel. But before I think what I want to say what it is, I want to ask you why you didn't allow us access into the interior of the house in your novel so that we could see all these other Thinnais. Why did you stop us at the main Thinnai in front?
That's an interesting question, mostly almost like a psychoanalytical question, why I don't allow people to enter my inner space. So maybe I'm just little cautious and prude, and I don't want that public invasion in my inner space. So I keep people outside and tell my stories from the Chinna Thinnai and the Peri Thinnai, because there are two different Thinnai. The small Thinnai is for the people for the house, and the Peri Thinnai is for the people, the wayfarers. So this also again, there are distinction between Chinna Thinnai and Peri Thinnai. And then we have also what we call Ottu Thinnai. Ottu Thinnai is when the house is very narrow, it's a very small house. There's two benches which is attached to the inside the house. That's called Ottu Thinnai. So there are different Thinnais. So why I want to have these two Thinnai, and I also made a point of describing the Thinnai in Permarcoil Street, which is like lavish Chetar house, proper Chetar house Thinnai that what you can find in Ishwaran Coil Street from the Kalati Chetar house, and the Thinnai from Kurchukupam. So that two different Thinnai, not only space-wise, but also social aspect, the social anthropological aspect is two different Thinnais. And also the how do you say the behavior in two Thinnais. You see, already inside the boulevard, people have already kind of very urban style of living, but outside the boulevard, it also already become rural. So they don't have the same behavior towards the Thinnai. So this is very important to understand the what you call the physical space and the social structure of Pondicherry, how people behave inside the boulevard and outside the boulevard.
For me, actually, the entire the way the Thinnai functions as a literary device and also a way to shed light on a very specific function of Pondicherry, or a historical, the historical specificity of Pondicherry, shall we say. This is really important. And so, of course, for sure, it's the author's right to draw a veil over whichever parts of the world that the author doesn't want the readers to go to. But so that we could just say, yeah, that's an easy explanation. Sure, you only want to show some aspects of your life and your inner world to your public. So the fact that we don't see all these internal Thinnais is a way of signaling that. But I prefer to be more positive and also think about what you allow us. You see, not because it's too easy to say that doesn't happen, but what does happen is more interesting, no? Also, so I think what actually happens when you focus attention on the Peria Thinnai and the Chinna Thinnai outside is that we see a focus on a particular function, this historical specificity of Pondicherry itself, which is that of Pondicherry as a contact zone. You see, as a literary critic, I would say that if you gave us the interior of the household, we are being drawn, like many a post-colonial writer would do, into an interiority of Pondicherrian life. That has its own usefulness, that has its own necessity, but maybe it's been done, you know. I mean, even to think of the classic example would be Ghore Baire, you know, Tagore's The Home and the World. The whole dynamism of that classic is because we are getting into the inside, the Antapur, the inside where the woman's world is unfolding and the changes that are going on in society are reflected through that. So that's perfectly valid, and we know why people do that. But and Anil Partha Chatterjee, the historian, made actually this entire distinction between the inner world and the outer world based, in a way, on the paradigm of Ghore Baire. So we know about all that. But I'm kind of more interested in what is in between, the transition space as you're talking about, between the inside and the outside. And the Thinnai is that transition space. And for me, my interest is in asking, what is it about a transition space that is so interesting to Ari? You know, what is it that makes a novel about Pondicherry a novel that's also about a transition space that is in drawing our focus on the space in between, you know. So in between space, as we know, like the Thinnai, you can say, yeah, it's just an add-on. It was made from debris. It doesn't have a validity of its own. It's only where people stop for a moment. But you know, you made everybody stop for the whole duration of your book on the Thinnai. So for me, it's actually given a lot of validity. And I mean, when I think about the history of Pondicherry, it's actually the validity comes from Pondicherry itself being this, we can call it, as I said, a contact zone. So when you're transitioning, you're also transitioning, but you're meeting other people who are transitioning. So everybody is meeting each other in a way that's expected.
Absolutely. No, as you already know, I already told it many times that when I started to write, it's to pin Pondicherry in the literary map. Because Pondicherry, of course, has been written for centuries and this and that, but written through an indigenous perspective by indigenous writer is more important. That nobody, like, for example, I'm sure that all these books from Judith Gautier to Thierry Ardisson, nobody has written about Thinnai. Nobody has written about food as part of the Pondicherry heritage. When we talk about heritage, of course, architectural elements are very, very important to keep the visual aspect, the memory of living space. But there's also different heritage that we should not forget, which is culture and mainly food. That's one of the reasons that I'm talking so much about food. And people eating food on the Thinnai, they don't eat inside.
Yes.
They're sitting and eating on the Thinnai. So every food item from Creole cuisine to Vartakari to what you call manduk, everything is happening on the Thinnai. So I want to that's my idea, to put the world on the Thinnai, not inside. If I take the people inside, the Thinnai get diluted, understand?
Yes.
It has to be on the Thinnai. Everything happens on the Thinnai.
That's why I call it a literary device, because obviously, if you're going to be like a faithful depictor of life, you know, like a sociologist, you're going to have to go inside the house. But as an author, you have carte blanche to do what you want, you know. So we are, in a way, suspended on the Thinnai, and we have no option but to observe life from that point.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But also tell the history of Pondicherry.
Yeah.
On the Thinnai.
Yes.
You see, I could have said it from sitting in the garden or under the tree and under the Nagamaram, this and that. But I want to tell the history of Pondicherry through the Thinnai, sitting on the Thinnai, because that's where things are happening. That's how you meet people. They sit, they tell the story, they tell the way they see the history of Pondicherry. Like Gilbert Tata say the history of Pondicherry through his eyes. Le Père Trémont, who really actually existed, he lived in Pondicherry. He was the priest of Kurchukupam church. So Père Trémont, he tells the story of Pondicherry through his eyes. So everybody's saying that the history of Pondicherry through their eyes, but sitting on the Thinnai.
This is the important thing then. It's about valorizing or making valuable an aspect of architecture that is, as even Ashok said in the beginning in his comments, is disappearing. You know, people aren't, the attention of the people who sanction funds and expertise to restore architecture is not being drawn to an element such as a Thinnai or houses which have Thinnais, because they are normally considered as they are forgotten, you know, they are passed over. And what you did in your book is draw extremely valuable attention to to why they should not be passed over, what we can gain by literally sitting on the Thinnai. And you've done it in a number of ways, in a very artful way, because you made the Thinnai itself the focus of all action, even the act of eating. I mean, because you've got characters who are the main action in the book is about talking, right? And sharing stories. So these characters in action, or even seeing other leisure activities, like we said, like the petanque, people are playing, people are walking, there are ceremonies, there are processions for, different rather fête de roi, sorry, all these different issues, different occasions are unfolding, but all from the vantage point of the Thinnai. So now the point is this, that this actually allows you again to to do two things. You are adding value to the Thinnai, but you're also allowing us to understand the culture, a particular culture of Pondicherry in a certain way. So the food, yes, you have, there's a lot of eating going on the Thinnai. That's part of the social life of the Thinnai. But I do think that, and while you give us a lot of different kinds of food, they are very particular. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think somebody is having a dosa and sambar on the Thinnai.
No. Exactly. But I could smell the idli from Pataka.
Yes.
Sitting on my Thinnai, I could smell the idli and the chutney.
What I'm saying is, you made a choice. You indicated to us that the world of the Thinnai, in its perimeter, in its you can olfactory perimeter, idli exists, chutney exists, and sambar exists. But on the Thinnai, you want to bring other kinds of food.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a bit about that food? Tell us a bit about that.
That is the richness of Pondicherry. As we all know, the Creole food is one of the most fascinating encounters between two cultures and three cultures, because there's also
multiple cultures.
Multiple. It's not only 2, 3, but multiple. So, and then again, Pondicherry is doing a fantastic work to revive this Creole cuisine. Yes. And creolity of the cuisine, because that is very unique, as exactly what Goa has done. This thing, I think Pondicherry is doing that. And I'm sure that my friend Ashok, who's listening to us, will do something for that, because the Pondicherry cuisine has to be revived, has to be
showcased
and promoted in a very good way. This is exactly the part of heritage we are talking.
Yeah.
And the food, when it comes to food, for example, I'm taking the example of Kusid, Buffad, Vivika, the beautiful Pondicherry cake, Christmas cake, and la salade russe. Where that salade russe comes from, nobody knows. Till now, people are just trying to understand where the salade russe comes from. So these are the dish we are eating on the Thinnai. But I deliberately choose also to incorporate that character of Lourdes from this Creole community. Then again, it's another heritage we are losing here. It is the Creole language.
Yeah.
The Creole community language, the community is almost disappearing. So nobody is there to revive. That's again one of my goal in that book, why I introduce this character, why I put Creole words in Lourdes' mouth, is to preserve that Creole culture, that Creole language, which is I'm sure in another 10 years, nobody will speak Creole in Pondicherry. Nobody.
Well, let's think a little bit about, because we are talking about the Pondicherry Heritage Festival, I think it's important then to talk a little bit about the significance of these Creole elements in signaling what kind of heritage Pondicherry has. Because I think it's very easy again to focus on we do this even in other cities of empire like Calcutta. Very easy to showcase the grand buildings that the British left and give them a coat of paint and make sure it's looking good. But for me, in my own city of Calcutta, it's the residential areas which show this really interesting absorption of some European elements into an indigenous way of thinking. Those houses that I pass by, the area, the neighborhood I grew up in, Park Circus, where all the houses are crumbling. Nobody has done a heritage conservation of that part of the city. And that is a shame, because that's where you see a kind of modernity, a kind of adaptation on the part of the people who are the locals, not the rulers, or not the people who are coming and commanding the scene, but the people who are living and adapting. So for me, while of course visually and historically, it's very important to restore and present the white town, so to speak, of Pondicherry, really the real beating heart of Pondicherry comes in the interaction of cultures and what happened as a result. whether it be in architecture, but also, of course, what people did inside those houses. They were eating, they were drinking, they had furniture, they dressed in a particular way, they were speaking. So those lifestyles, is really what a holistic heritage, intervention into Pondicherry, I hope, would be able to think about, not just the architecture, but the life of the people
Yeah, but
inside.
no, you are absolutely right, Ananya, because I'm also happy that Pondicherry Heritage Festival decided this year to focus in the Tamil area where this Thinnai is disappearing. It's of course very sad that physical evidence of the Thinnai are disappearing because people wants to make business, they want to make fast money, and they are destroying things. They're building a what do you call garage, and renting the space to different. Even those days we used to rent Thinnais to tailors, to
Yes.
patters,
Yeah.
what do you call jewelers. So it's not something that Thinnai, we don't make money out of the Thinnai. But suddenly people, the notion of having a Thinnai, it become intrusive.
Yeah.
You see, that people don't want stranger to sit on the Thinnai. So I think the Western conception of privacy has changed our way of thinking. Because in Western countries, privacy means it's mine, it's ours, which was not existing in the Indian culture. So the Western notion of privacy has perverted our own way of thinking and destroying this Thinnai and making ugly buildings and ugly houses, which doesn't have any charm. And so how exactly, what are we doing with this Thinnai? How do we work for this? And of course, people like Ashok and people, um, Sunaina and Kakuli, they are doing their best to preserve physically the present.
Yeah.
But you and me, we went further to create this virtual Thinnai. Why we created this? So this is exactly the modern technology, the modern tools to preserve the idea of Thinnai. What are we doing on the Thinnai Creole? We invite the world to come and sit and chit chat and talk and analyze the world and also share common ideas. That's what we do in a physical Thinnai, and that's what we are doing on a virtual Thinnai, right?
I would actually say, and this is a good way to start wrapping up our discussion, because we would also like some questions, I think. So I want to start moving towards the end of our talk by discussing a little bit, reminding ourselves a little bit about what we are doing on our cultural platform, which, as we know, it's obvious we named it after your book. It was inspired by your book because the book has the Thinnai at its center, and you were very keen to see if we could not use the virtual, kind of technology for connecting virtually to create the sense of a virtual Thinnai, which would have the advantage, again, your fiction writer's imagination saw the advantage that what cannot happen in real life can happen in the virtual platform. Anybody from anywhere, we don't need to buy a ticket and get a visa or whatever and come to Pondicherry. Anyone can click and join us on our platform, which is what people are doing. And because I was doing all the work on theorizing and thinking about all these disappeared and disappearing aspects of our cultural heritage, it's very interesting to me that wherever you look in the post-colonial world, not just in India, but I'm talking about places in West Africa, which you are familiar with, and I've traveled and worked in a lot, Ghana and so on, Nigeria, all these places, Ivory Coast, wherever there is anything that's disappearing, it is usually part of that composite mixed culture that we are calling Creole, the encounter, because this was always, for various reasons, stigmatized. And therefore, it is the first thing to be ignored and rejected. But to be honest, that's where the most exciting stuff was going on. And people like our platform because they recognize that and they remember their own participation in these Creole cultures, what we are calling creolized cultures, be it Anglo-Indian, be it Goan Portuguese, be it, Pondicherry, be it from, and they're like, yeah, we know that. We also make that kind of cake. We also make that, but the interesting thing for me is that it is always on the Thinnai Creole, when we have our discussions, we talk about many things, but food is very sentimental and a real trigger for people to share. and want to talk about. So I think that from this experience that we have, it would be nice to offer this suggestion to the Pondicherry Heritage Festival that they also focus more on food. Maybe next year we can work specifically on thinking about Pondicherry heritage in the form of really a deep look at its unique cuisine. I was disappointed personally because I know that this cuisine exists and I was looking for it in places in Pondicherry, and it was not so easy to find as an outsider. You told me later, and later I came to know people like Anita de Kanaga and Shea Pushpa. There are tabdot that you can go, but it's not so easy to discover if you're just in Pondicherry for 2 days and you want a Creole meal. People are calling food Creole cuisine, but it's not really. It's just the excellent South Indian food that we find anywhere. I'm a real fan of any cuisine south of the Vindhyas, actually, because I grew up in the Deccan. But I know that. I'm looking for something a little different. And I couldn't really get it easily in Pondicherry. As you said very correctly, Ari, in Goa, for example, there are people saying this is heritage Goan food. It's a Goan kitchen. You come in there, you can eat a meal. And yeah, maybe that's also getting a bit standardized, but it's certainly that authentic experience is there for people. So I think Pondicherry can do much, much more. And once that's done, it will kind of almost, in my opinion, activate interest in other elements of the past, which are more physical and more difficult to find the funds for, to find the support for, such as the Thinnais, which are disappearing. So for me, you said we are preserving the Thinnai. Actually, Ari, what I feel we are doing is we are reactivating and creating a sustainable imagination. Absolutely. For these elements of.
You know better than me. Now, out in the world, how many people know the word Thinnai?
Yeah. Everybody's using it.
Wherever we go, wherever we give the conference from all over the world, we have been doing almost like 50 to 60 since we started the Thinnai Creole project.
Yes,
and everybody now the word Thinnai is going to enter the lexicon very soon, as IO has entered to last
exactly.
2 months back. So after IO, it's going to be the Thinnai. So
it's going to be the Thinnai for sure.
IO Thinnai.
So sorry, I just want to say one small thing, Ari. There's a comment. Please. There's just a comment in the chat from Shubham Biswas. He's reminding us of the connection with Indochina, the Indochine connection, the Creole food. He said that in Pondicherry in 2018, I should have been there in the festival because there was you could have experienced a slice of Creole food from Indochine. Yes, it's true. I wanted to mention this because you have the Vietnamese connection very strongly in your book. When you have the names, there's some Vietnamese food, creolized Indo-Pondicherry and Vietnamese food is there on the Thinnai too. So Shubham, you're absolutely right. Through Ari, I've got to understand the importance of the connection with Vietnam, particularly, and Pondicherry, the historical connection. But I will still stick to my guns and say that if I was in Pondicherry for 2 days, apart from the festival which happened, and I'm very glad that it was showcased in 2018, but it's not visible that this is a very exciting and interesting part of Pondicherry multiculturalism and creolization. So again, a bit more of somehow of showcasing all those connections which have come into Pondicherry, I think would be fantastic for those of us interested in knowing more about this place. Somebody is not happy with what we're saying.
Yeah. Okay, never mind. That's okay.
Anyway, I think I want, as I said, I would like us to take some discussion from the audience. I feel we've hopefully outlined the different ways in which we are using your book and the way the book connects to Pondicherry heritage. We're somehow creating some kind of like a set of connections, a network, a web, where now we are moving into the virtual domain, but the idea would be to make people more aware of certain elements of Pondicherry's material culture and heritage, so that we don't remain virtual. We kind of, when we are able to travel again properly and connect again physically with each other, hopefully we can we can kind of galvanize and inject these perspectives into the way Pondicherry heritage is being kind of presented today for, to be sustainable.
Yeah, but I'm sure. I mean, people like Ashok and other bodies working on different aspects of keeping the heritage.
Yeah.
They're doing fantastic work. I've been invited 2 years back to participate for discussion with Dr. Nalam and the writer P.A. Raja. So
Yeah.
I know they're doing fantastic work. And it's also the people, I mean, the people of Pondicherry to take their own responsibility also, not just being dependent on INTAC or Pondicherry Heritage Festival. If each and everybody take responsibility for the space they are living in, I think we are doing a good job. So I think that's very important.
That's really important. And I think going back to the opening comments, about these lamentably disappearing Thinnais, which of course belong to private homes, and one cannot, I'm sure, intervene into the affairs of people and how they choose to deal with their property. But it's really about raising some kind of consciousness, isn't it? And changing the aesthetics and the feeling towards the past. On the, I think on the part of people whose homes these are. And having ways of dealing with the inevitable, which is economic necessity. We cannot prevent people from, making economic decisions which have to do with the way they have to live. But to have a more long-term way of thinking imaginatively, how can we change perception? It's not about going in there and telling one person, hey, don't do this to your home. It's it's beautiful, it's valuable, it's got its own intrinsic part in history, but it's about having a kind of mindset change where people themselves feel able to save themselves. I don't know what happened. Anyway, so Ari, I think shall we draw this to a close here, because I think
let's close here, and let's ask Kakoli to say the last word. And I really thank Pondicherry Editors Festival and CAN and INTAC for inviting us, for having us. And it's been lovely, and thank you guys.
Thank you.
The public also, of course, definitely.
Thank you, Ari and Ananya. That was absolutely fascinating and so interesting for us to hear you both talk about the whole socio-cultural impact and what you just made us aware of what we're really losing out on, and really enlightening. Thank you very much. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read out some of the comments we received on Facebook, if you'd be interested in hearing that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
that would be lovely.
Yeah, so there was a question from Mr. Shivakumar Shivas, who was asking, why is Mr. Ari calling the Thinnai as the Creole Thinnai?
Why I'm calling le Thinnai Creole?
Yeah.
Le Thinnai, first of all, itself, the title itself is already creolized, because he used the French LE, like D in English, and Thinnai, the Tamil. I could have just called Thinnai, but Le Thinnai is very important to call it Le Thinnai, because they also refer to the Franco-Pondicherrian heritage culture. So this is very important. Otherwise, it becomes only Tamil. And Pondicherry is not just Tamil. It's a multicultural society. It's a multicultural city. So we cannot just say this is only Tamil, this is only French. This is Pondicherry. Pondicherry has more than 15 different languages speaking out there. So, and then why creolized? Creole, as I said, is the future. As Edouard Glissant, the poet from Caribbean, said, is the future. And one, I associate myself to Ananya Kabir, who has been doing the work of Creole Indias. So when we put our the project together, it's normal that I take my Thinnai to get creolized by Ananya. Otherwise, it could have been just Le Thinnai and where Ananya goes. So it was important that she is part of with me sitting on the Thinnai and doing this project together. So that's why we call it Thinnai Creole.
Thank you, Ari, for that. And also, of course, in a way that it was also not it was also symbiotic, or my understanding about Creolindias was certainly impacted by your writing and by what I experienced at Pondicherry. So in a way, it was a push-pull thing going on. It just happened that the pandemic moment gave us a kind of stimulus, or it was an unusual moment where we were galvanized to think perhaps more deeply and more quickly than we would have otherwise. And so it kind of came out in a flash like this. Undoubtedly, in some shape or form, I would have done an academic project on Creolindias, and I would have analyzed Le Thinnai as a Creole something, the other emblem of creolization in India and whatever that means. But that would have only remained for a few academics to read. And however useful that may have been, it lacks this immediacy of connection and talking and conversation to a number of people like we're doing right now. So for that, of course, it's my turn to thank Ari that he came up with this idea. And then in thinking about what we call it, we just devised a kind of, it's not like 2 + 2 made 4, that Thinnai and Creole made the Thinnai Creole, but the two elements kind of made a bigger and deeper composite, which is really what we're doing now. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, that's a very good example that you're taking, Ananya, when the mathematic example of 2 + 2, because creolization is not 2 + 2 is equal to 4. 2 + 2 is 2. As simple as that.
2 + 2 is 10.
Yeah, I think Mr. Shivakumar also, he says, thank you very much. He's
Thank you
with your answer.
Thank you.
And,
thank you, Shiva.
Yeah, and there's an interesting comment. It says the concept of Thinnai is becoming thin. But if I have a chance to build a house for myself, we'll build it with Thinnai and preserve the traditional intelligence that our ancestors had in our homes. This is from Mr. Prasad Palani Kali.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's of course, but he needs to also understand, like yesterday or 2 days back, by doing some research on the net, I found a beautiful house in Chennai, which has have the architectural components of the old traditional house, but with a new style, giving a new twist of what the Thinnai looks like, what the Muttram looks like, what the Talbarum looks like. So we can change according to the new technology, new material which is given to us. It's not at all a problem. I mean, there's more light in that house, because some Tamil house can be very dark, but that's also that also a reason behind that, because during summer it was so light, so they kept some dark rooms in order for the light not to enter. But now our way of living is changing. I think it's very important that we shouldn't get stuck in the past.
Yeah.
It's nice to move in the future, but also taking example, using materials and ideas from the past and making more modern, I would say.
This is really a lovely comment by Mr. Prasad. I think that was his name. And I would love to visit this home when it comes into being, because I think this is what I meant when I said when we talk about preserving, but in order to, in a way, reinvent. This is a word that came out in our discussion yesterday on the Thinnai Creole, where we were talking about drumming and how different traditions of drumming from India, such as the Parai drumming, has become reinvented in places like Réunion and, places where Tamil indentured laborers went. So in the same way, we can find that we don't have to leave India to find a way to reinvent. We can do it inside, So the same impulse that Mr. Prasad was talking about, I want to build a modern Thinnai in my house. Fantastic. That's the way we make sustainable heritage, If we just replicate the antiquity, so that's almost static. That's not making it comfortable for us to inhabit in the present. We've got to make the past comfortable for the present. That's how we make it sustainable. So it will be very exciting to see this home. And, I hope there's some way in seeing it realized in the future. But it's nice, Ari, that you saw other examples in the research.
Right. Okay. There are quite a few comments. Maybe whenever we've done, you want to go into the Facebook page and take a look at some of the comments and reply to them. That'd be nice. Yeah. And Sunaina had some things. She had some questions.
Yeah. Hi. This is really interesting because, and I like that analogy too of 2 + 2 not equal to 4. I would like to say it's 1 + 1 starts being equal to 3. You take something and you add something else to it, and it becomes something totally different.
Absolutely.
And that is essentially what creolization is. I don't think people know what it means, and how it is yes, it is an effect of colonization earlier, in the early times. It is an effect of slavery in some other cases. It is an effect of bonded labor in like the cases of the Caribbean and so on. But if you understand the process of creolization, it is something which is ongoing, and it is much more so today than ever before because of the migration of people and how people are moving from one place to another, where they retain their own culture, they adapt a little bit of the culture into the society they go and live in, or the country they go and live in, and what actually emerges is a third culture. And so it might be interesting to, anthropologically, sociologically, and even just, for people to understand each other better. I think it might be interesting to try and find different definitions of creolization, for want of a better word, because it is a kind of an integration which does not lose, you don't lose the Tamilness, you were Tamil to start with. There were French people who came in here and influenced your life. Today, there might be some others who come and influence your life. And you might take on properties of those cultures that come in, and you might make your own culture. And when there is enough of a body of people doing that, that's when it kind of becomes Creole. So maybe kind of defining it would be an interesting way for people to understand each other better as well, I think. What do you think?
No, absolutely. Ari, do you want to, why don't you respond to that, and then I'll add on.
Can I make a comment? Sir, I'm happy to hear this lecture, but I could not be for a long time. Creolization is a word used in linguistics for language mixture. When there is a social cultural mixture, they call it acculturation. But when it comes to the house, they call it modernization or accommodation or something. I do not know. I thought that when you said cultural creolization, it is something about the language, the French and the Tamil Creole. There is a possibility for that kind of thing. So you are talking about the house form, design and everything, changing according to the situation as creolization. And another one thing I would like to say is that the Thinnai, which they have at the backyard, is called Purangadai Thinnai, which is closer to the kitchen, which happens to be at the backyard. And there will be a door there because in the good old days, I'm using the phrase, not any other thing. The untouchables, when they come to clean the bathroom in the good old days, they will come to the backyard and clean it and go. And also to wash the vessels and everything, they keep all the vessels outside and they dry it on the Purangadai Thinnai, and then the house owner take it inside. They will not allow the servant maid to come into the house. If suppose the lady happens to be a Brahmin caste or some other caste also, they restrict the entrance of those people. So the house has a kind of restriction to the caste people, to the caste level. If a friend close to me of my own caste, he can come in up to the Mutram or Talvaram. But if he's a stranger at the outside Thinnai, the inside Thinnai is for the household people. For the household people. Very close friends may come to the inside Thinnai. The Purangadai Thinnai is only, of course, as Gautier said, it's for ladies to sit down, or sometimes it is for the resting place for the workers. And usually the man in the house will not sit in the Purangadai unless he is doing something bad like smoking or having some drink unknown to the family. Then he will do that. That's the thing. So this is the system. And also there will be a side road surrounding the house for the servant maids and the scavengers to go. They will not be allowed to enter the house. They will go to the backyard, work in the kitchen, and get away. Thank you. I
Thank
enjoyed
you.
this lecture.
Hello.
Thank you, Hariknathan. Thank you.
Hari,
But
can I
on
just
the
say a
topic-
few words?
Yeah,
Hari,
please.
Ashok here. You
Please,
know,
sir.
talking about creolization, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So, in fact, I would think I'm not talking about so much the architectural heritage. I'm talking
Yeah.
more about
That's
what we are
right.
discussing, the intangible. I think Reunion is a very good example.
Creolization is a term to be used in language mixture.
Yes, absolutely. So in fact, I was in Reunion 2 years ago, and as you probably would know, there are more people of Indian origin and African origin than from France in Reunion. So the food, the culture, the language, a lot
Yes.
of it is very, very alive in Reunion. So it's a place worth visiting for people like Ari and Ananya. You
Yeah, I've
really
done
get
a lot of research there actually. I've been to Reunion, so
and also talking about the creole influence in Pondicherry. Unfortunately, it's fading. It's fading. There is an attempt in revival in the food. In fact, for some reason, it's more the French kind of food which is getting revived, because probably Indians prefer to eat that. There's less efforts being made to revive the Creole food.
So there is a research study on the Sierra Leone Creole in Africa, Sierra Leone Creole. And also in Nagaland, there are many tribes are there, and they speak a kind of language called Naga language and Assamese mixed. They call it Nagamis. That's a Creole language. And we have done research on that from the Central Institute of Indian Languages, Mysore. So Creole is a linguistic term, technical term.
Can I just intervene, if I may, Ari? Can I?
Please.
Answer Mr. or is it Professor Nathan? I'm not sure. But no, I mean, frankly, of course, there are different, but also it goes back to Sunaina's earlier comment about definitions of Creole. And by the way, I really appreciated also what Sunaina said, because it really encapsulated how we think about creolization. So if I may quickly say, from an academic perspective, the word creolization first was indeed used academically by linguists to talk about Creole languages as contact languages. And these can be from anywhere. Usually it started with thinking about the languages in the Pacific, South Pacific, when the Europeans were going and, kind of trading and Captain Cook and all that. So the classic discussions of Creole linguistics come from that South Pacific contact spaces. But then the word Creole was, of course, used like almost as a way to describe certain languages that people were speaking in islands of the Caribbean, islands of the Mascarene. So it's like a phenomenon like pottery, happens in different places at the same time. No one culture can say we make pots and nobody else does it. They learned it from us. It's a phenomenon of it's a consequence of linguistic contact that this languages develop because of the need to communicate across things that across people that have no prior contact with each other, therefore don't have any chance of knowing each other's language, but they are placed in a third space and they need to communicate. So out of that forced encounter, a new language has to develop. And linguistically, we know sometimes it has syntactical features of one language, it will have lexis from another language, and linguists are doing their job in explaining how these combinations occur, taxonomies of the language. But the word Creole itself initially, historically, was used as a descriptive word by people speaking those languages in places like the Caribbean. In Cape Verde, the first Creole society in the world was created there, and they called their language Creole, which is a Portuguese word. So from all the European languages, all the European communities that were sending out people as part of expansionism, colonization, the Portuguese, the French, the Spanish, they all shared, of course, the common Latin, ancestry. So they all have the same kind of linguistic formations, and all of them develop some kind of cognates to call this language Creole, Criollo, Criollo in Spanish, etc. But later in the 19th century, linguists used this term to talk about contact languages and how to explain them. So we really must make a distinction between the work of academics and the work of people who are living in these worlds and describing themselves. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there's been a large number of academics who then used linguistic creolization to talk about culture as a creolized phenomenon. And these are people like theoreticians like Brisson, whom Ari mentioned, but also people like Robert Chaudonson, people like Robin Cohen, Stuart Hall. A number of people have used the idea of creolization theoretically to talk about culture. So we are not the first people to do that. What we are doing is we are systematically and very consciously taking it back to thinking about creolized culture in India, in the Indic peninsular space, where not only is it disappearing, as Ashok points out, people are not used to thinking about Indic culture like this. Why? Because we are obsessed with purity. It's very simple. We still want to cling on to the caste system, to differentiations, to how we are distinguished from each other, rather than imagine that there's another way of thinking about our cultural interactions. So it's quite political, frankly speaking, for us, as much as an investment in what we, as individuals, Ari and I, find precious and important in the way we belong to India, and our connection to the Indic peninsular space. So while we appreciate that exciting things are going on in Réunion and Trinidad and Fiji and all these places, we are following those things. We are connecting up with them. I have done a lot of research in these spaces. I've been to Réunion, but we are very interested in bringing all that back to, okay, what is Pondicherry? What is Goa? Why are people in India running after French food and running after dosas and idlis and sambar, but they're forgetting the bafad and the fugad and the kusid? Why? But if you go to Goa, they're not forgetting it. Something has happened in Goa that people are very happy to have a bafad and a kusid in Goa. Now, why can't they enjoy it in Pondicherry? So it's really a matter of a very important and strategic combination of marketing, research, sentiment, emotion, and talking between ourselves, like we're doing between academics, writers, people who are in charge of resources, and the locals who are creating their space for sustainable heritage. So if you have a restaurant that's got a Creole menu, then people will come and eat it, not just come to the festival, but they will come back and find it, and that will generate income, and the culture will live. It won't be just something to showcase in a vitrine. It will be something that people come to experience. That's my point of view. So I hope that answered a lot of the questions that were given to us by different people. But Ari, if you want to add something, please.
No, as usual, you did a fantastic job. And I hope Mr. Prof. Arikinathan agreed with us, because you rightly said, like Chaudonson, Stuart Hall, and Cohen has been working more on the cultural aspect of creolization than on linguistic. That's, again, we should also inform our public that we are working on a project with Center of History and Economy to Creole Indias. And the first session that we had is how do we use the word Creole?
Yeah.
It's an ongoing process. We are doing that. We are doing research with different academics all over the world,
including
really
linguists.
Including linguistics. So to understand if we are using the Creole word in the right sense. So that's also happening, Prof. Arikinathan.
Yes.
Ari and Ananya, Ari particularly, I think after all this discussion, it's very important that we hear the Creole language. You need to say something in Creole.
Sunana, you made my word. You made my day. Where is my... What do I read, Ananya? Do I read from the thing from yesterday?
Yes, please read the first few sentences from our...
Give me 1 second. Sunana, what I'm doing now, 2 days back, we had a conference in Orléans about Commonwealth and post-colonial languages. And for the last 4 or 5 months, I wanted to write a short story only in Pondicherry Creole, but I've been very lazy. So then before that, Ananya said, no, listen, we have a conference in tomorrow, so do something. So I wrote that beginning of short story, which is gonna be entirely in Pondicherry Creole.
Can you find it, Ari? Have you
I'm doing it. I'm doing it. Just give me. Can you talk for 2 seconds? Let me find it.
I can talk for 2 seconds while you're finding it. So basically, yeah, this was was something that I've been hearing a lot from. Well, already it was noted by other linguists and historical historians working on Francophone Indian writings, such as Blake Smith. Now, Blake Smith is a historian who has translated Thinnai into English, and the book is going to the English translation is coming out in February, which is like next month. So we are all super excited about it. I guess we should have another little Zoom party to celebrate that. But Blake Smith also wrote an essay in an academic article about what's going on in Ari's writing linguistically. And he mentions that it is the one book where Pondicherry Creole is being given any attention at all or documented anyway. And this is in the character of Lourdes that Ari talked about. And it's no coincidence. Professor Arkanathan will understand this very well because he's working with Creole languages. There's a very intimate connection between Creole languages and food, because these are all languages of the domestic space, you know. So the food connection with language in the Creole habitus is really strong, and it already occurs in Thinnai, when Lourdes is the person who's cooking all this Creole food, but she's also speaking the few words of Creole, the sentences of Creole that occur in the novel. But I told Ari, you got to do more, and he also is almost like that was a stepping stone. So there is this dream to write something more sustained in using Pondicherry Creole, not just one character, or the very important character.
I got it.
And you got it. So I've given the preamble. Now make us listen. Tell us how it sounds.
So the title of the short story is called "Ips Don't Lie," right? And I made it purposely in English. Just give me 2 seconds, Arkanathan. Let me read it and you can come back.
Let me read out his thing. Yeah.
So it starts like this. Le ciel, pardon. Madame de Rosario s'assit lourdement sur le banc en ciment et sortit son éventail. La légère brise du front de mer ne pouvait rien contre la chaleur estivale de Pondichéry. L'air était suffocant. Laissant ses amis dans l'impatience, elle s'éventa coquettement avec son éventail espagnol en bois de Poirier. Elle allait reprendre son récit que Thérésine de Gonzaga arriva. Tirez la sapate donc. Pourquoi même acheter bagarre avec moi tout le temps? Thérésine avait cette manie de se disputer tout le temps avec les autres. Ayo, quelle grippe sous dents, ce Thérésine, pinailler pour 2 sous 3 paisa avec le pousseur. Pourquoi même prendre pouce-pouce dents? Elle habite ici même. Marie-David marmonna entre ses dents. Tu habites Thérésine Marché? Elle danse twist dents. Rosalie Gaston s'esclava et donna un coup de coude à sa voisine. Tout le monde pouffa de rire. Une fois assise, Thérésine plissa sa jupe et s'assit confortablement sur le banc. Le monde défilait sur le cours Chabrol au gré des vagues du golfe de Bengale. So this is the beginning of this short story I'm writing, and this is the only one attempt. The second attempt is not at all using any French narration at all. So the entire short story will be only in full Creole. Now I'm only introducing dialogues in Creole, but later on my attempt is to write an entire story in Creole language. Voilà la Sunaina.
Again.
Yes,
Can I
please.
ask you a question, sir? Yes.
Yeah.
The Creole in Pondicherry Tamil or in Pondicherry French speaking, I do not know about the French, but as far as the Tamil language is concerned, in Pondicherry, there is no Creole. There is, if it is a Creole, then it will be on the lexical, syntactic level, and they should develop a new kind of syntactic formations. As well as the Tamil is concerned, we never have any syntactic formation of its own to call as a Creole. But we can say there are interference of French into our Tamil language spoken by the soldats or by the French people. Like for example, in French, they say "le sonner la téléphone," they say "phone adikren," but we will say "nan phone pandren." Say that kind of few lexical formations are there, but there is no Creole in Tamil with the French and everything. Maybe it may be French and Vietnamese, or maybe that. No Creole at all. And we have done research and in Tamil language, and we have clear data about it. Yes, ma'am.
You want to say something, Ari, and then I'll respond.
Yeah, Arakana, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right by saying Pondicherry Creole is not the Creole as it is in the plantation tradition in Réunion, Mauritius, Caribbean.
Yes.
Of course, that's a totally different. But here, what we talk about Creole, it's a language spoken by a community, by the Creole community, right? And I don't have the book right now on my thing, because I also always show the book. Give me 1 second, please. You talk, let me talk. So you're absolutely right. Here, what we call Creole, it's speaking French in the Tamil way. So that is what the Creole community was doing in Pondicherry, is using Tamil words and making to express to express themselves into French. So that's why tirer la sapate don, le ciel est parti don, manam poiduchi. Manam poiduchu தான் வந்து வானம். They also misunderstood between manam and vanam. You see, this is how exactly it works. So I'm not saying that it is the same Creole as in the plantation tradition, but this is a totally different Creole that exactly that lady was Kelkar, Lena Kelkar wrote a fantastic book, the encounter between two languages and what happened. She called itself as a Creole.
And if I may, yeah, I'm sorry, I will also respond, please. The point is here that even within the idea of Creole, there is always a spectrum. And I think linguists are very, they are in a mathematical way, you are trying to, fix things and see what, but that's not the only way to think about Creole culture. We are using creolization to think about culture. Within the spectrum, creolization is also so within this, thank you, within the spectrum, creolization is an unpredictable phenomenon. As we very well know, there's been a lot of research on insular Creoles, including in linguistics. You have talked about Sierra Leone, it's a very important example of a, can I please no, I would like to finish first, and then I will return the mic to you. So in Sierra Leone, for example, this is an example of a littoral Creole. This is on the West African coastline. Always, if you look comparatively, Creoles of coastlines have been given less academic attention than Creoles of islands. This is another discussion, we don't have time for it now. But just to point out that there are historical reasons why Creoles in littorals do not develop in the way that Creoles on islands do. That is why even our colleague Hugo Cardoso, who is the expert on Luso-Asian Creoles, is telling us that asking why did a Creole not develop, a Portuguese Luso Creole did not develop in Goa? Well, we know there were pockets where there could have been these traces. So the question is not why, rather it is not to say there is no Creole. The question is what happened to those Creole speaking people? Where did that go? Why the archives don't have traces? Why the people don't adopt it anymore? Why did they leave it? Why did it disappear? So as cultural analysts, we are interested in disappearance and retrieval. So it doesn't matter to me if a linguist tells me there is no Creole. I'm looking for something else. My work is something else. I'm working with the author who is using the imagination to excavate the conditions for disappearance. So if the fiction writer, he has the license because he's writing fiction to imagine the disappeared worlds into being. I, as the critic, am intervening to examine why he is doing the imagination. So the linguist can come in and join us. You are welcome, but you have to join us in our work, not say that this is not happening and this is not going to happen.
No. What I am trying to say, I mean, as a writer, you have got all the liberty to do as you like in the language. For example, I think some people know Tamil. I can tell the Tamil and the English syntax. For example, some people may say, Trivandrum Express 2 hours late. This is a sentence in Tamil. Trivandrum Express 2 hours late. All the words are English, but the syntax is Tamil syntax. This we don't call Creole. It is influence. Similarly, I can say, "En father ke 2 sons and 2 daughters. In father, to my father, 2 sons and 2 daughters. This is also exactly Tamil syntax, but the words are English. This is not Creole, it's an influence. The same way we are doing this.
Yes, okay, I think
So I'm not interfering in your thing.
Right.
But linguistically, there is no Creole. That's what.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we can wrap it up now because it's getting to be time, but I would like to say a few things. Firstly,
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much.
It was very important to hear, of course.
Yes, yes, very, very much. And what Professor said, you know, in India, we talk about Hinglish and Tinglish and whatever else, which are these combinations of multiple languages, and that's how the younger generation speak instead of trying to speak as much as possible one single language. Professor, we are now ending the thing, so we are just wrapping it up. No, what he said is very true, that there is a mixing of languages, there's creolization, there's all of that. Now, what is interesting in this whole discussion is that it is opening a lot of doors and it's making people think.
Absolutely.
And this is the important part about what Pondicherry Heritage Festival tries to do. First, it tries to show people what things are. They can be fictionalized, they can be real, they can be academic, they can be imagined. All of these have their own reality in our lives, and all of them have a valid place. We may not agree with some of these things, we may not agree with each other on some of these things, but they each have their own valid space. And what it does is it enriches people, it makes them ask questions. And at the end of the day, it shows them the importance of looking at things they don't normally think about, like heritage. We never normally think about heritage. We do not even imagine that our rivers and our beaches are our heritage. We do not imagine that our spirituality is our heritage. Just as we don't imagine that our built heritage, which in that sequence comes last, because what the universe is created of is your natural heritage, then comes your spiritual heritage, then comes your cultural heritage, which includes everything. And then at the end of it, you have your man-made built heritage and traditions and all the rest of it. And our whole aim in the festival is to highlight aspects of all these heritages and an intermix of all these heritages possible, separately mixed up in whichever form, with the main idea that we recognize what heritage is. It kind of ignites our curiosity to know more about it. And I personally believe, and I'm sure everyone will agree with me on this, that when we love something, we take care of it. Be it our little kitten or the pen we like or the little book we like to write in, whatever it is, if we like something, if we love something, we care for it. And that is the whole point of the Heritage Festival, to open the doors for people to see all there is to see as part of our cultural and in every possible way heritage and built heritage, and then to do something about it. So I hope that this discussion brings in a lot of individual points like the Thinnai. The Thinnai is definitely a Tamil word. Nobody disputes that. Nobody says it's a Creole word or a concept. The Thinnai is there. And as he says, that whether it was called the Thinnai or something else, it has been around since a long time, since centuries. And the concept and the idea behind the Thinnai is very beautiful. It's a state of mind as well.
Yes.
And that is what we need to understand, because our living spaces are an extension of ourselves, and they should not be separate from ourselves. And today, the kind of places we live in and the kind of places we construct, which are boxed in, they are not only alien to our culture, they are alien to our way of living and ourselves as well. So maybe this kind of discussion opens our eyes and minds much beyond the language or the Thinnai or the Creole or the food or anything else, you know. So thank you very much, all of you. And thank you most of all, Ari and Ananya. And definitely, yes, let us go on having more Zoom conferences and meetings. And let us also try and have you visit next time. Okay,
would
thank you
love
very much.
Thank you, Ariana, Ananya.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sunaina. Thank
very
you,
much, everyone.
Akoli,
Thank
Ashok.
you, Ari. Thank you,
Yes.
Ananya. See you soon again.
Yes.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
thank you.
Thanks for a wonderful and good wishes for the rest of the festival.
Thank you
Yes.
very
Hope
much.
to see you next year at the festival.
Yes.
Definitely, fingers crossed, we will be
Yes.
there in person. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.